Well, hello there. I'm sorry the show has been posted late today, but I am in Orlando where I'm going to be working with the Florida Education Association, giving a speech tonight, moderating a panel tomorrow with some of the most influential union leaders in the country. Very excited for that. Hosted the Hangout last night, and so up a little bit late today. First, just so sorry for those who couldn't get into the Hangout last night. I think we had like 70 people there or something. Huge crowds, massive crowds. But my computer here in the hotel room was frozen, and I could just see there were 5 or 6 or 7 people in the waiting room. And I'm very sorry to Latoya, Karen, and Megan, and Drew, and anybody else who was stuck in there. It was agonizing. I clicked a billion times. It just wouldn't let people in. And so, great suggestion by Scott Bennett. From now on, the Hangouts I'll have a co-host, and that person can not only help zap people's mics that are on, but make sure everybody gets in and that there's no problems. So I will fix it, and I am sorry about that. But I hope to see you at next week's Hangout, if not sooner, everybody who is stuck in there. And I hope to see you at next week's Hangout, if not sooner, everybody. I have a great conversation with Tim Wise today. Really is one of the best. And I'm going to jump right to it. No time or ability really to produce the news segment from here. But I will say yesterday was a day, we found out that Mark Robinson, the Republican nominee for governor in North Carolina, had admitted to being a black Nazi, referred to himself as that on a porn site of all things. Oh, and there's so much more to that. Then we learned, to take a little heat off of Mark Robinson, that a 30-year-old reporter, a well-known political reporter and influential reporter, Olivia Nuzzi at New York Magazine, was apparently having some kind of an affair with RFK Jr. Got to be a tough day to be Cheryl Hines, RFK Jr.'s wife, who found out that her husband's having an affair, and he's being investigated for chopping the head off of a whale on a beach with a chainsaw. It is hard to believe that this is the world that we live in, but it is, and we're here together to remind each other of what is good and what is real. We did a lot of that at last night's Hangout, and I've got a great conversation doing more of that coming your way right now. So let's get to it. Tim Wise is an anti-racist, the OG speaker and writer, author of 10 books, I believe. Now he's a senior fellow at the African American Policy Institute, and he's always great on Twitter. Follow him there. Tell him you heard him here, and let's do it right now with Tim Wise on a Friday. All right, well, I could reach out to him and talk to him every day to get his take, because I always want his take. Tim Wise joins me now, though, today for the first time in a couple weeks. Great to see you. Lots of questions. Thank you for joining me.
Good to see you. Yeah, indeed.
Let's start. I have a note card I brought, and I thought today I would just say, as kind of a bit, words, and then get your reactions to them.
Okay.
Are you ready?
All right.
Are you ready to play?
Sure.
The first two words.
Sure. Why not?
The first two words are Elon Musk, white supremacist? Question mark.
Yes. I mean, by any objective standard, I think, look, he's been tweeting out or Xing out or whatever we call it now, pretty overtly racist material. And I'm not just talking about like neo-Nazi and white nationalist material, but material that suggests he believes in, this sort of racialized meritocracy, that he actually believes in scientific racism. There was a piece on the web just the other day about that, talking about the way that he views the meritocracy in a highly racialized frame. So, yeah, it's not just that he's apartheid Clyde from South Africa. It's not just some of the more overt things, but he seems deeply wedded to the notion that there is something superior, inherently and intrinsically superior about white Western civilization. If you believe that, you are sort of by definition a white supremacist. So and you are one, even though your products that you make are crap and you're losing billions of dollars. I mean, he's lost 84% of the value of Twitter since he bought it. So whiteness clearly isn't superior in that regard. His Cybertruck, which is without doubt the ugliest automobile to ever be created, falls apart in the rain. It gets wet and then it won't run. The Teslas constantly are breaking down. The auto drive stuff doesn't work unless you consider running into people in fire hydrants, auto driving, and his penis rockets blow up. And then he claims that that's some great victory. I mean, virtually everything that he touches turns to shit. And yet he does still believe that not only are white people generally superior, but that he is superior. He is, obviously evidence of the fallacy of all of that, but that doesn't mean that he isn't one of them, for sure.
Yeah. And the damage that he's doing, is there any way to quantify it when he's got such a huge platform? Anybody with millions of people listening to them should be taken very seriously, in my opinion, as hard as it is to take them very seriously. People like Bill Ackman or Laura Loomer or anybody in the progressive, an athlete, listen, if you got millions of followers on any social media platform, much less many, I wish we didn't have to take you seriously. I wish there weren't so many people that were so influential, but I think you do, and they are.
Well, that's just it. He's got 200 million followers on Twitter or on X, right, or whatever the number is. And he tweets out this thing the other day about, nobody's even trying to assassinate Kamala Harris, which should prompt, and I hope it already has, a visit from the Secret Service. You can't just say that just because you're the wealthiest man on the planet. And of course, when he gets caught doing it, he retreats to the argument that all these guys make. Oh, it was just a joke and all my buddies thought it was hilarious. Yeah, I'm sure that your tech bro buddies who get paid to laugh at your dumb shittery think it's hilarious. But this is not open mic night, at the Laugh Factory. This is not your opportunity to get up and workshop material. You're the owner of several of the largest companies and most powerful companies in the world. You're a government contractor, for God's sake, who shouldn't now have any government contracts when you're essentially advocating indirectly the assassination of the Democratic candidate for the presidency. And I know people write it off. He's socially awkward. He doesn't have social skills. They'll blame it on the autism. You know what? Autism doesn't make you an asshole. You know what makes you an asshole? Billions of dollars is what makes you an asshole. So it's not the autism, it's the assholism.
Yeah.
And in this case, the white supremacist.
Yeah, well said. JD Vance once said Trump was like Hitler, and now JD Vance is acting like, or using a lot of the techniques that Hitler and the Nazis used, and a lot of fascist stuff here going on in a lot of different ways. But as vis-a-vis what's happening with Springfield, Ohio, and the big lie he has told about Haitian migrants that are now living there. I mean, what do you make of this guy's transformation and the damage that he's doing with his platform?
Well, I don't know what damage he's doing to his own platform or brand, but he's doing a lot of damage to the country. There's no doubt about that. To
his own constituents. He's doing damage. He's the Ohio senator, and he's putting kids in Ohio they're getting, bomb scares. So that's the damage.
Well, I know. I just meant I thought maybe you were suggesting he was in some sense hurting himself. He's clearly helping himself with the base of MAGA voters who love this kind of stuff. The demonization of immigrants and black folks at the same time is like the perfect combination for some of these people. It's like they get the 2 for 1. And in this particular case, we just learned today, right? The Wall Street Journal reports, I think it was, that he knew that this was a lie when he first repeated it. He knew there was no evidence for it when he first repeated it, and yet he still repeats it. And then he goes out and he says, well, it's the media's job to fact check this and to investigate what my constituents are telling me. Right. But then he won't identify who any of those constituents are. He's not saying, by the way, Carol over there on, Smithville Road is the one who called me. Maybe you ought to go talk to her or whatever.
Well,
he's not identifying it. And the only one who did come forward has said that it wasn't true, has said that she had no evidence, had said that it was all second or third hand, something she saw on Facebook. And then she apologized. So the only actual claimant who we have any idea who they are has retracted the story. And yet JD Vance continues to run with it because he knows that it pays off in the long run. But keep in mind, this is a guy that was willing to throw his own people under the bus in his memoir. Everyone loved that memoir. It was such a great, heart-rending memoir. That memoir threw his people under the bus, basically said, with the exception of, dear old Mamaw, they were all a bunch of drug-using hillbillies. They were all a bunch of worthless, ne'er-do-wells, unlike Mamaw and then, him. I guess he got out and became a venture capitalist or whatever, right? He threw his entire, or not his community, because he didn't even grow up in the hills and hollers of West Virginia or whatever, but he threw the people he was writing about under the bus. So if you're going to sacrifice your own, and if you're going to not stand up for your own wife, when the comment is made by Laura Loomer about the White House is going to smell like curry, which is obviously an attack on her South Asian ancestry, and your wife is South Asian, and you're just like, well, whatever. I mean, he's giving Ted Cruz a run for his money in the least likely to stand up for my wife when attacked by a right winger category. So he's a despicable person, but we should have known that. When you throw your own people, your own community, your own family under the bus, you will throw other people's families under the bus. There's nothing shocking about that.
When you say mamaw, when Tim says mamaw, it makes me laugh very like a little boy. I don't know why I find it so funny, but I can't stop giggling. All right, that's a little on JD Vance. What did you think of the news around the armed man? I don't know how we should headline it, how we should describe it. He did not shoot at Trump, but the reporting, the news around the armed man, and I guess the big question that a lot of people are having to respond to is JD Vance and others on the right, Scott Jennings on CNN and others, saying that we've got to tone down the rhetoric because there's, people are taking shots or trying to take shots at Trump. Obviously, it's an insane thing for him to say at the same time that he's putting his own people in threat. But I did need to get the Tim Wise reaction to any and all things around this armed man at the Trump golf course.
I mean, the best example of this was Byron Donalds saying, the Dems need to stop talking about Project 2025. It's going to get Trump killed. Yeah, I'm sure this guy at the golf course just came from reading about Project 2025 and he was like, oh, that's it. I'm taking Trump out on the golf course, which, by the way, can we just point out something? If Donald Trump cannot secure his own golf course with a wall, how in the hell is he going to secure the country with a wall at the southern border? How do you do that? I'm going to secure the country, but I can't secure my own place where I shoot little balls into holes. Right, on a golf course that I own. But this guy has a gun. He's apparently a former Trump supporter who became a Vivek Ramaswamy tech bro supporter and wanted him to run alongside Nikki Haley. So he's clearly not imbued with left-wing ideology. I'm sure he's not a critical race theorist. He's not somebody who is an advocate for left or progressive causes. And he's not a Democrat, apparently, or at least he hasn't voted for Democrats in the past. And yet now we're being told it's the Democrats' fault. Same thing with the first assassination attempt, right? Actually, the only assassination attempt, because this was not really an assassination attempt. The fact that somebody with a gun was around where you were, if that's the standard for almost being assassinated, we have all almost been assassinated because there are 350 million guns in this country. And I'm fairly confident there are a few within like an eighth of a mile of me right now. But I'm not being assassinated. I'm not being threatened. I'm not being shot at. Neither was Trump. But the first guy, that kid, all of his classmates said he was conservative. His parents were Republicans. He had been a Republican. He wasn't some leftist, but they're continuing to push that because they want to deflect attention from the rhetoric of their own candidate. JD Vance, going back to him, says, well, you can't call somebody fascist and not expect this to happen. Meanwhile, roll tape. There's Donald Trump calling Kamala Harris a fascist and a Nazi and a communist, none of which words he can define, but all of which words he feels compelled to throw out without context, with the assumption being no one's going to do anything or care or take a shot at Kamala Harris. There's no danger in that. You can refer to immigrants as poisoning the blood of the country, and that's not overheated rhetoric. You can say all of those years that Barack Obama was a foreign imposter, not even born in the United States, maybe a secret Muslim, and that's not going to create hatred. This is a guy whose entire brand has been about ranting about other people and using overheated rhetoric since he took out that ad in the New York Times calling for the death penalty for 5 guys who turned out to be innocent in the rape of Trisha Meili in Central Park. And he still won't apologize for that. So when he apologizes for that and acknowledges that he was wrong, which I should point out, he reinforced his old belief in that debate. He repeated the lie that they pled guilty and that they were guilty, right? Until he retracts his call for the execution of 5 innocent Black and Latinx men, then there's absolutely nothing Democrats have to apologize for at all. When you say he's a threat to democracy, you're basing that not on some overheated, irrational hyperbole, but the fact that the man says, and he's already shown, he will not accept an election outcome if he does not win it. If I tell you I am going to be in this election and if I lose, I will not accept the outcome, I'm telling you that I am a threat to democracy. That's not wokeism or woke leftist ideology. That's just basic definitions of words. If you won't accept the outcome of an election, you hate democracy, period. And so are we just not supposed to say that? We're not supposed to discuss that for fear that some irrational person might take a shot at the president, and that irrational person is somebody who's already previously voted for him? You know, they need to worry about their own people. Their own people are the ones that are irrational. We don't have any desire, those of us on the left, to assassinate Donald Trump. We just want to see him stomped into the ground on election day in the old-fashioned political context. There's no reason. Why would we want to shoot at a guy who's shooting himself in the foot every time he opens his mouth?
And more
all he has to do
importantly,
is talking, and he shoots himself.
And more importantly, you know, and talking right a lot more about ideology and movements of hate than most of us do. And the best way to slow down this movement, to change the trajectory, to affect this ideology of Trumpism and MAGAism, which is a kind of fascism and white supremacy, is to beat it at the ballots. If he were to be killed, it would make him a martyr forever. And the ideology, this hate-filled white supremacist, fascist, Christian nationalist ideology, would only grow in strength. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes. Oh, it would be the absolute worst thing. Not only would it be immoral and horrible and wrong for anyone to kill him or any other president or anyone else. It's always wrong to kill people. It's amazing how easy it is for those of us on the left to just say that, to just say it's always wrong to advocate violence like that. It's not hard, but the right has a really hard time doing it because their side of the people that are calling for the execution of Mike Pence. And then they go, well, I'm sure there was some context we need to parse when it comes to that. No, there's not. When you threaten to kill someone, when you advocate killing someone, you're a bad person. So it's wrong to take a shot at Donald Trump, but it's also strategically, as you just said, it would be disastrous for those of us who believe in progressive social justice causes, because it would indeed cause the kind of, even after the first assassination attempt, I think there were many of us who thought, even though that guy wasn't on the Democrat side, even though he wasn't a liberal, he wasn't a leftist, he wasn't a progressive, but we thought that just based on the sympathy that would naturally attach to a man who had been shot at and who could have been killed, that he was probably headed for victory. And I'm sure he thought that. And I'm sure his people thought that. Right. And then he wasn't ready for the change at the top of the ticket after Biden got COVID again and stepped down and Kamala Harris became the nominee. And I think in this particular instance, what we're seeing is that the left is more than willing, and not just the left, broadly speaking, but the Democratic Party is more than willing to beat this individual at the ballot box, because we understand that's the only way that you actually defeat Trumpism. You cannot defeat Trumpism by killing Trump. You can only defeat Trumpism by defeating him and then all of the candidates who have attached themselves to him up and down the ballot. And once you do that, then you send a very clear message to the voters that whatever y'all think is the norm in America, you think that everybody's on your side. We're proving to you now, election after election after election, that isn't true. Whereas an assassination, in addition to being horribly immoral, would never be able to make that point to the American people. In fact, quite the opposite. The other side would be able to say, see, they had to kill him because they know he speaks the truth and that everyone agrees with him. And that would only lead to more political violence. There's no upside to this if you're on the left. Yes. There's a lot of upside to it, on the other hand, if you were on the right. And that's why you have all these folks on the far right who are what we call accelerationists, right? Their whole point, their whole purpose is to engage in violence to accelerate social breakdown and chaos. During the Black Lives Matter uprising in 2020, there's case after case after case after case of the Boogaloo Boys and these other really overwhelmingly right-wing reactionary militia types and violent types going and deliberately trying to sow chaos in California, in Minneapolis, and other places where they went, in one case, shot at, I think it was 2 officers and killed one in California. And that, of course, was blamed on BLM. But it turned out it was Boogaloo Boys. It was right wingers who wanted to go and create chaos deliberately to discredit BLM. That is what the other side does. They are the chaos agents. They are the ones who benefit from chaos. Democracy and those who support it never benefit from chaos. Only fascism ever emerges out of that.
So well said. I'm so glad I asked you about that, because I think that's a really important issue to talk about, why it would matter, why it would be really bad for progressives. So well said. Okay, so I got to ask you also, I just want to get your take on all of the different people from JD Vance kind of started this and opened it a bit. We've heard from a lot of other Christian conservatives for years about families and what works best. But now we have heard Sarah Huckabee Sanders the other day question whether or not Kamala Harris can have a real moral conscience without kids. Jason Whitlock tweeted, he's a black man, he's a sports guy, right? He tweeted, a society driven by and serving intact families works best for everyone. Those of us unmarried and without kids should have less say-so. We should not be allowed to vote. The nuclear family is the foundation of all successful societies. These were more whispers. We knew that people that were religious thought about these things, but there is a movement and this in different elements of society that if you don't have a family or a household, that you shouldn't have the vote, or even more importantly, that you're not as good, especially for women. What do you want to say about this ideology that used to be a little quieter, but now they've really opened up? They're very boldly stating their values. Why does that matter?
Well, first about Jason Whitlock. I mean, right. Here's a black man who says he shouldn't be allowed to vote because he's not married and doesn't have kids. He is like Stephen from Django, except at least Stephen and Django actually had real power over Monsieur Candide. Like he actually ran that plantation, which we discovered at the end before he gets his ass killed along with everybody else. Stephen had the power. Jason Whitlock is just like Stephen, but without the power. And he's saying, I don't deserve to vote. I mean, look, I think if you announce that you shouldn't be allowed to vote, I agree. I think that we should just go ahead and you shouldn't. You shouldn't be allowed to because you've voluntarily given it up. Unbelievable. But look, no, getting back to the question, I think that this is an example of how the far right for years has sublimated not just their racism, with dog whistles. We know how they did that. They used dog whistles for years and years and years to cover up their real pretty overt hostility to black and brown folks. Yeah. But they also sublimated their sexism. They sublimated the misogyny. They sublimated this Christian nationalism, this patriarchal sort of trad wife stuff that is now becoming very popular because we have these avenues for it to be spread. Back in the day when you didn't have social media and you didn't have ways of getting all these trad wife videos and these trad family videos out there that would sort of flack for, extreme patriarchy and extreme misogyny, it would have been very hard to spread those memes or to spread those ideas. There just wasn't an avenue to do it. What are you going to do? You're going to fax a picture of you and your 11 kids under the Christmas tree with guns. Yeah. What technology would we have used, Right. But now it's very easy for that stuff to spread. And as a result, the party that always sort of believed in it, or at least had an undercurrent that believed in that, is now very comfortable leaning into that and suggesting that if you don't have kids, it is because you're selfish, right? It is and especially the women. The women are the real selfish ones, is what we're being told, because they're deciding to go to college and to have a career. That's what Harrison Butker was essentially talking about at that awful commencement speech that he gave. He's like, I know you gals are glad you got a degree and everything, but I mean, let's face it. The really important thing is to get out there and make a lot of babies. And everyone was shocked, but that has always been an undercurrent of the belief here. The idea that when women entered the workforce, when women became the majority in American colleges, everything went to hell. And so now what we have is we have policy ideas being pushed by people who, even if they have families, are basically incels in terms of their mentality. Elon Musk has had 70 children or some nonsense because he thinks that his seed is so special. He has to spread it around and then spend no time taking care of those children other than just financially. Doesn't have to spend any time, doesn't have to have a relationship with them. He just puts babies in people, and he clearly wants to put one in Taylor Swift, he says. He said right. That. And so we have these people who are pushing policy ideas that are out of the Handmaid's Tale, and we act as if somehow we ought to be surprised, but we ought not be surprised. They have always been believers in traditional patriarchal culture. As I've said many times on your show, the only real difference between the right and the left, it has never been about what people think it is. It's not about big government and small government, because both sides support big government for certain things and both sides support less government for certain things. The difference between the right and the left has always and only, going back to France at the time of the revolution, has only and forever been about one thing. Do you support the restoration of traditional hierarchy and the maintenance of traditional hierarchies? Or do you support the alteration or the abolition of those and the reformation of those? Those on the right support traditional hierarchies of race, of class, of gender and sex and sexuality and religion, right? And so they want straight, white, Christian males with money to govern because they believe that they are superior. And they want the quote unquote nuclear heterosexual heteronormative family to be the dominant form because they believe in its superiority inherently. Those of us who believe that those traditional hierarchies are oppressive or marginalizing or undemocratic, unfair, unethical, and immoral are the ones who usually find ourselves on the left. So why would we be shocked that the right is reverting to type? And it's a type that has been their type for literally hundreds of years. It's just that now they're embracing it as opposed to lying about it, which I suppose in some regards deserves, a hearty thank you from the rest of us, because it is exposing that sickness to a lot of people. Now, that will result in them probably getting some new people who like that thinking. They'll be able to recruit off of that, but it will also, I think, in this day and age, demonstrate to the majority that that is not the side they want to be on. I firmly believe that we are the majority, and those of us who believe in equity and in justice and an opportunity for everyone, and to allow people to control not only their reproduction, but their professional and occupational choices, their educational choices. I believe that we are the majority by far. So I hope they will continue to talk in this way and expose themselves in that manner that Sarah Huckleberry Sanders just did in her speech the other day.
I just saw I didn't know the whole trad wife memes. And if you go on, for example, TikTok or Instagram, I guess there's women who have millions of followers and they talk about their lives as trad wives. Now, I guess no problem with that. Enjoy, have a great time, whatever you want. But the issue becomes in that you're somehow judging those who aren't like you, or more even importantly, saying that if you aren't that way, that you lack a sense of morality, or she suggested what humbles her. Like, what? She's a black woman. Like, you to say for one woman to say that to another woman, by the way, in general, but to say that to a black woman, what keeps her humble? Boy, I think she that's when it becomes obviously really insidious and dangerous and terrible. Enjoy your trad wife life. I want a trad husband life. Let's go.
Right. Listen, look, I mean, a trad wife, I'm not going to shame anybody's kink. If casserole making is your kink, and knitting for your husband,
and being subservient, it's okay. If you want to be told what to do,
fine. It's perfectly fine. It's, and there are, I should point out, there are some of those trad wives who don't venture into politics on their TikTok. They just literally make casseroles and bake things and offer recipes. And you know what? God bless them. That's fantastic. But when we have politicians who, seeing that, decide that they are going to say, as JD Vance now has, JD Vance has done it to such an extent that this is why I'm saying it's this incel mentality that permeates even people that in his case have a family. He has a family, and yet his mentality is still this male resentment of the incel community online, who just blame women for everything, who blame, feminism for everything, who think that women are selfish and only put themselves first and don't put their babies first and all of it, which is why he's like so excited to talk about, his wife's mom, who was a successful scientist, right? Biologist or something, who left her job to come care for the kids. And to JD Vance, that's like a story that isn't it's a heartwarming story, I guess, for the grandparents to step up. But to him, that was like her obligation. You can tell in his voice when he talked about it that she did that because she understood the proper role of a woman. If it had been his wife's father who had done that, I don't think he would have been bragging about it. He probably would have been embarrassed, like, oh my God, what kind of man does that kind of thing, right? What kind of man would want to take care of the grandchildren? Because we understand, or we've been told, that that's women's work. So this kind of stuff has now just come from the fringe into the mainstream. And although it's incredibly dangerous, I think the more people see it and the more people hear it and the more people realize that that's what these folks actually believe, that the better it's going to be for those of us who believe in progressive change, because I just think that we're the majority and they're not.
Before you go, I just want to ask you one more thing. You were telling me before I hit record that you, of course, a senior fellow at the African American Policy Forum, are talking to and working with your colleague, the co-founder and executive director, the great Kimberly Crenshaw, on a piece that hopefully we'll get to read. But it's a look at and criticism of the way Democrats, and maybe not the campaign itself, the Harris campaign, is or is not talking about race. You're telling me, well, Republicans will never stop talking about it, and somehow you think that Democrats today, or who, are too often talking around it. What is the criticism?
Well, I want to say this, and she and I would both want folks to know, Kim and I and the organization, it's not a criticism so much as it is a caution, right? What we know from the Obama years, right? There was a very steadfast attempt by Barack Obama from the time that he stepped onto the national stage in 2004 at the DNC and said those lines that made him a star in the eyes of millions of people. There's not a white America, black America, Latino America, and Asian America. There's just the United States of America. You remember the line. Ever since then, Barack Obama as a candidate and then as president tried over and over to do the post-racial liberalism thing, right? He knew we weren't post-racial. He understood, of course. He's obviously a brilliant guy. He understands the realities of racism in America. But for political reasons, he felt as though, and he had people telling him, and he believed it, that they needed to talk less about race for fear of triggering racism against him as the first black candidate for president at that level, who, I mean, Shirley Chisholm was, but the first to get that far and then to become president, right? And there was a logic to that. It was intuitive. It made sense on one level. But what we know from the research and now from history is it didn't work because the right peppered him with racial stuff over and over and over again, from Jeremiah Wright to the racial profiling of Henry Louis Gates to, the firing of Shirley Sherrod at the USDA when Breitbart put out that horribly edited video that made it sound like she was some kind of quote unquote reverse racist. We had Glenn Beck on the radio saying that the Affordable Care Act was just Obama's plan for reparations for slavery. We had Rush Limbaugh on the air saying that Obama was deliberately trying to tank the economy as payback for slavery and that he was going to start confiscating white people's farms. You had Tea Party rallies with pictures of the president with a bone through his nose dressed as an African witch doctor. I mean, no matter how much Democrats, the party or the candidate or the president in that case, tried to avoid the issue, the other side was not going to let it go because they know that pays. The problem is when you unilaterally disarm in the face of that, you leave the terrain of racial conversation to the reactionaries. And what we are concerned about at AAPF and what I'm concerned about, what Kim's concerned about, is that we see that creeping in a little bit. We saw it at the DNC. We watched it. There were some obviously great moments at the DNC. There were some obviously fantastic speeches. But for the most part, with the exception of Al Sharpton's presentation where he brought out 4 of the exonerated 5 and talked about racism in that speech, it was sort of the issue that could not be named. It was sort of the Voldemort of the DNC. Even when people sort of walked up to the line of it. There was one, mention, Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, made the comment, you can't love America while lying about its past, talking about like the book bans and some of the censorship we've seen. But he didn't talk about, well, which past is being censored and why is it being censored? You had the 2 heads of the 2 largest teachers unions who got up and gave, some nice remarks, but they didn't talk about the teachers who were being fired or run out of teaching because they're talking about critical race theory. They're talking about systemic racism or DEI. There was no conversation about the attack on DEI at all. And I realize people might say, Tim, come on, we got to talk about these bigger, broader issues. I get it. Yes, we have to talk about universal issues like jobs and healthcare and better schools. But is it impossible to connect that to race? Because one of the things, and we've talked about it before, is that we know one of the reasons that our safety nets are not as strong as the industrialized Western nations that we compare ourselves to is because of the racialization of those safety nets, right? When you talk about income support, you talk about universal health care, you talk about any kind of social program at all for people in need, even if those things disproportionately are going to benefit, numerically speaking, white folks, because people of color are going to reap, in some people's minds, a disparate amount of the benefits because they are disproportionately poor or working class. That is seen as some kind of racial giveaway. That is what the right always says. So if we're going to talk about the need for better health care, we should, but we need to make the point to white people watching, the reason you don't have better health care, the reason you don't have better schools, the reason you don't have a better safety net when you're in need, the reason that we don't have affordable housing is because anytime we talk about that stuff, these folks on the other side scapegoat black and brown folks for causing, for costing too much, for taking too much.
If people want just quickly, a good example would be the financial crisis. That was blamed on poor black people and so many more white people. Well, we all got hurt. The less you had, the more you probably got hurt. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's a really, I always think about that one. I remember Mark Levin and many on the right blaming the financial crisis on black folks who bought homes, black and brown, poor folks. They blamed
the Community Reinvestment Act in particular. They blamed a law that had nothing to do with the loans that were given out. Yeah. In fact, the banks that had the biggest losses, the financial institutions that had the biggest losses were independent mortgage brokers who aren't even covered by the CRA. And the CRA-backed loans actually performed better than the non-CRA-backed loans during that period. So it was just a lie, but it was one that demonstrates exactly the point I'm making.
And more specifically, just because I know this one inside out, the federal government, when they started approving those loans. They were blamed for approving those loans because they got in on it. They only got in on it at the end after the private banks were giving all that money away, and only in a way to compete with the private banks, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mae. That's the federal government going at the very end. I guess we'll get into they shouldn't have, but they did. But it was the private banks and and the deregulation of the financial industry that obviously created this, took advantage of it, and fucked us all. And of course, they somehow were able to blame it on poor black folks.
That's right. And bringing it back to the Dems, what we're trying to say is it's not that we expected the DNC to talk about race all the time, but there were opportunities to connect the dots, right? There were opportunities to connect the dots between racial injury and class injury, to make the connection between that which hurts black and brown folks and that which hurts white folks. And it seemed as though they danced around that in the belief that somehow if they leaned into it at all, I mean, even if you think about, for instance, when I remember early on, I think it was the first day, they had Maxine Waters come on, not in prime time, though, and talk about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer going to Atlantic City.
I played that whole 3 minutes. I remember watching it and going, I wish this was in prime time, but I did play the whole speech.
That's exactly right, because when that's not in prime time, what it does is it deprives the viewers of this important history that I don't think a lot of people know about. They don't and I think it would have been an amazing opportunity for the Democrats to say to the American people, you know what? Our history on this hadn't always been good. In fact, we know that historically it was the other guys who were the anti-slavery party. It was the other guys who had the better record on race. And now look how far back they have fallen. And look at what we've done, starting in 1964 with Fannie Lou Hamer and then with Shirley Chisholm and then the Rainbow Coalition. They wheeled Jesse Jackson out for a few seconds, right? And I know he isn't healthy enough to give a speech. I understand that. But did they have any sort of video about the Rainbow Coalition reminding people what this man did in 84 and 88 to bring the party to the place that it is now? They did not. And that was even though they spent so much time in the DNC talking about, look how we look like America. That was the line you kept hearing, how amazing it was that Ford looked like America. And I agree. That's an important selling point. But how do you think we got here? Because that wasn't what the party looked like even 40 years ago. That isn't what the party looked like 60 years ago. I would argue that's not what the party looked like 20 years ago. That has happened because of the committed action of people of color and white folks to make it a more pluralistic, non-white dominated, if you will, multicultural, multiracial party. And the Democrats should lean into that history as a way to say this other team that we're fighting, they want to take you back. They say that's what they want. They want to go back to this fictional past. We want to go toward the future. The future is multiracial. The future is pluralistic. The future is multicultural. And that's us. And we have made significant strides. And we're going to own our history. We're going to admit our shortcomings, and we're going to tell you what we're doing to move forward. And I just felt like that opportunity was missed. And I'm worried that there are people maybe within the campaign or within the party who were still afraid, like Obama was, to talk about these things in the hopes that if they just redirect to a conversation about jobs and about education and about healthcare and about housing, that's going to do it. And as we've seen this last week, it isn't, because what will the other side do? They'll say, well, they're talking about the economy. I guess we should blame Haitians for eating pets. They're talking about housing.
The point.
I guess we need to talk about dogs and cats being eaten by black people. That's what they're going to do every single time. And so if that's what they're going to do, we have to point out, do you see what they're doing? Do you see what they're doing? They're trying to manipulate you. They're trying to remind you of some prejudice that they believe resides deep inside of you. And the Democrats ought to be saying, we think you're better than that.
Well, then we'll be accused
on your racism, and we think you're better than that.
Well, we'll be accused of talking about race too much if we do that.
Right. Of course, but we're going to but whether or not the Democrats talk about that, whether or not liberals and people on the left talk about it, the other side always says we're the ones who are racist.
Well, it's like
we're not talking about it.
You're saying we're reacting. If we're not talking about it, we're reacting to it, meaning Barack Obama was not born here. So he makes up the birther statement, and then we react to it, and they say, stop talking about race. Like, I didn't make up that Obama wasn't born here. What are you talking about?
Right. The reaction to racism is being cast as racism. Right. The reaction to, which is what they do with everything. It's why they said affirmative action is racism. No, affirmative action was a reaction to systemic racism and systemic racial injustice. DEI, they say, is racism. No, DEI is a response to systemic and institutionalized racism.
Right.
You know, but that's the thing. All of the anti-racism is being recast like in some type of bizarro upside down world as the problem. And if they're going to do that anyway, what that's basically meaning, if all their attacks or the vast majority of their attacks are racialized attacks, if you're not allowed to call it what it is, then basically you can't react at all. You can't respond at all. If the other side's politic is 100% racial and identity-based resentment all the time, it's either race or it's gender or it's sexuality or it's nationality or whatever it is, and we're not allowed to call it what it is, you're basically saying we're not allowed to speak about what the other side is doing, which is obviously not a winning strategy. And so our concern, and again, it's a cautionary tale. It's not a criticism. We're not slamming anybody. It's just a caution that this didn't work last time. And there's not a lot of evidence that it's going to work this time. And in fact, I would argue that in this particular moment, especially as younger people are flocking to Kamala Harris's campaign, younger people whose attitudes and understandings around multiculturalism and identity-based equity are usually quite a bit better than the previous generations, that we ought to actually be leaning into this and challenging the other side on precisely that issue as a way to grow a permanent multiracial, multicultural coalition. This is the opportunity for that. And we have a better chance to do that, I would say now, even than in 2008 and 2012. In 2008 and 2012, I can understand the feeling that it was risky, even though I think, you know, they should have gone ahead and leaned in because the other side was going to do what they did. But now we're 16 years past the first Obama election. It's time to go ahead and acknowledge that there are only two Americas that we have a chance of achieving. One is the America of the past, which is this white, straight, Christian, male-dominated America. Or the other one is a multiracial, multicultural, pluralistic America. And we ought to be leading with that. That ought to be the battle cry of the Democratic Party, because that's the kind of thing that's going to actually inspire people to join that party and to get involved and to get out and vote for Kamala Harris.
Love it. Love it.
And I say that, by the way, that was, I want to specify, since I work for a nonprofit organization, we as an organization are not endorsing anybody. We don't take a position on who should be elected. That was Tim Wise speaking as Tim Wise when I said that.
Thank you for that caveat. I wanted to make sure that we clear that up, of course. Important. Very good. I love it. Thank you so much for talking to me, Tim. Really appreciate you as always. Always a hit.
We're not going to talk about Taylor Swift at all. I thought we'd talk about Taylor Swift.
Oh, God. Well, listen, I will talk to you about anything for as long as you have time. I'm being respectful of your time. Please tell me what you think. I mean, I posted, I don't know what your angle is on it, but I did go on my, MAGA local Facebook page where I love to just hop on and genuinely get their thoughts sometimes, because I'm not trying to change anybody's minds. I just want to know what you think. And I just said, just wondering how Trump supporters talk to their kids about his post saying, I hate Taylor Swift, and, thinking, maybe some are Christians. What do you think about that kind of rhetoric? And of course, some of them don't believe that he said it. He literally posted it under his name and his own social media network. Some of them question it. But what is your, that was my question, my angle, and none of them had any issue with it at all. They're like, I hate her too. And,
it's stunning how far backward the quality of political discourse from presidential aspirants, or in this case, a former president, how far back that discourse has fallen. I mean, can you imagine, for instance, 1975, 1976, Gerald Ford getting up and screaming, I hate the Bay City Rollers. Like, would he have done that? Would he have said, I hate KC and the Sunshine Band? I hate the Bee Gees. Nobody would have done that, because somebody who wants to be president doesn't think that it's presidential, I would hope, to attack a pop star or a musician or anyone, to actually say, I hate anyone.
Well, Ronald Reagan tweeted, I hate Wham.
Right. Well, she would have, I'm sure, had he had Twitter.
Somebody said that's somebody else's joke.
No, look, but no Republican or Democrat that I can think of who's ever run for president before would think to themselves, I think I'm going to say I hate someone in big capital letters. And it happens to be someone who is the most popular, or arguably the most popular, one of two most popular pop stars on the planet. And I've already attacked the other one, because he's, they've already attacked Beyonce plenty of times in the past. So we know what they think about her. Now we're going to go after Taylor, and we're going to say, and this is after he praised her a month ago or 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, and talked about how beautiful she was and how talented she was. And then when he thought that she had endorsed him because this fake meme was going around. He got really excited, and then he turns on a dime. This is the mentality of a 13-year-old boy who sends, or really a 9-year-old, 10-year-old boy who sends a note to the girl he has a crush on who sits next to him at the desk. And it says, do you like me? Yes, no, maybe, the way that folks used to do it back in the day. And then she just doesn't pay attention, doesn't respond. And then he goes ballistic. It is the most incredibly childish, immature thing for anyone to do. And if I were a Republican, I would be humiliated. And I think some have said, oh my God, why would he do this? This is not good. This is not helping. It's not presidential. And yet what's fascinating, none of those people are saying that they will now not vote for it. It's like, we know he's being a child. Yeah. We know he's a big baby. Right. We know he has thin skin. We know he gets angry on a dime, but we're still going to vote for him. So somebody who can be baited the way that Kamala Harris baited him in that debate, somebody who can be baited by an endorsement of his opponent by the world's biggest pop star, is someone who can clearly be baited and manipulated by Vladimir Putin, or can be, manipulated by any foreign leader. Yes. I mean, that ought to be obvious to everyone.
I'm so glad we spent time on that then, because there's a lot of serious, important points about it. Thank you so much, Tim.
That sounds good, my friend.
Tim Wise, everybody. Tim Jacob Wise on Twitter. Go follow him there. Let him know that you heard him here. Isn't he great? He's always great, but that was one of the best, I think. I've got to put clips out of that one for sure. But right now, I've got to get back to work on tonight's speech for 600 people, educators and more, working to help educate and keep kids safe here in Florida at Florida schools. Just champions of champions. Love these people. Can't wait to do it. Very much looking forward to it, but a little nervous. So back to work, refining my comments for this evening. Thank you very much for listening and supporting the show this week and every week. Can't do it without your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Go watch the Hangout link if you're a subscriber, if you want to relive it or if you missed it. And thank you, John Carroll, johncarroll.org, for writing all the music for this show. Go support him as well. Love you guys. Talk to you later.
You better stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. All you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.